Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 389, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, July 9th, 2025. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. So happy to be with you. I hope you had an incredible 4th of July, and for that matter, the entire weekend, since 4th of July was on Friday. I'm sure a lot of you probably had some time off from work, and for those who are in places like food and bev and service industries, I'm sure you were quite busy. I hope whether you are partying or working, I hope you all have recovered by now and are enjoying this July week. And no surprise, it's July, it's hot. We've had some rain, of course, typical, usually, you see some thunderstorms, as it gets hotter out, but we really haven't had one in a while. I guess we had a little bit, I think it was at night. Thankfully didn't wake me up. I forget how many days back that was now. I'm, losing track of time. Everything's bleeding together, as it were. But in any event, I hope you're staying cool and having fun out there. And let's see. I didn't really, I didn't do anything for 4th of July. Laid low. No fireworks or anything crazy. But I hope you all went out there and had some fun. And if you're looking for plans, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. See what's going on here in the Charleston area. Not just, this weekend or, whatever day you're looking for in the near future. You can look months out in some instances and see certain things that'll be going on around town. So definitely, if you're looking for things to do, that's the place to be. But enough shameless self-promotion. Let's get into the latest news. All right, we've got an update on the shrimp scandal. I've been trying to think of something with shrimp scampi, shrimp scandy. I'm workshopping here. But this is about that whole shrimp fraud thing we've talked about a few times. The last episode, we talked about there was like 25 restaurants that were listed as having, this study that was done, turning out that they did not serve local shrimp despite advertising such. We had one restaurant, which was Paige's Okra Grill in Mount Pleasant, saying, that they basically have so many pounds of shrimp that they have to go through each week that local purveyors really can't, keep up with that demand. And so they gave some pushback, saying also that they didn't really think that they were, advertising, local shrimp. They just happened to be very close to Shem Creek. And so you saw a little bit of pushback from them. But one restaurant is already kind of, made the story go away from them, basically. So just days after that federal lawsuit that publicly named 25 Low Country restaurants that were accused of misleading customers about the origin of the shrimp they serve, Hyman's, the downtown restaurant I'm sure you're all very familiar with, they reached a resolution with the South Carolina Shrimpers Association. That's the group that, is behind the lawsuit of those other, now 24 restaurants. So the lawsuit was filed in federal court in Charleston. It claims restaurants falsely market imported shrimp, as we've talked about. And they're looking for an injunction and monetary damages while also pushing for a state law that would require restaurants to clearly disclose where their shrimp is sourced. So they want to go that step further, not just like, hey, if you don't say that it's local shrimp on your menu, that's fine. They want restaurants to say, okay, it's not local, but we source it from, wherever. Because I'm sure a lot of people will be fine, depending on the restaurant, of course. If they're not looking specifically for local shrimp, they're probably fine if it came off of East Coast waters. The places that people may not like are when they're being sourced from other countries who have different regulations. So in any event, Hyman Seafood ended up releasing a statement to the media. News 2 is where I'm pulling this information from, although other places probably have it by now as well. Basically, their statement said, at no point did the restaurant knowingly advertise that they had local shrimp when they, in fact, were not serving that. So they have carried domestic shrimp, they said. But what ended up happening there, apparently there was a miscommunication between the restaurant and this third-party media advertisement firm of some kind that handles their social media. So apparently there were posts talking about local shrimp, South Carolina shrimp, whatever it may be, that the restaurant wasn't really aware of, at least according to the statement, and that, they're going to get that fixed. They said once they were made aware of the posts, they worked to fix it. They said they didn't even know about the post until this whole this whole lawsuit came out. And so they said that they have either edited those posts or removed them. But basically we're saying, hey, we're taking responsibility. We hired someone to do our social media. There's a miscommunication. We'll remove those posts immediately. We don't want to, deceive customers, and they want to be 100% transparent. Again, this is all according to the release that they put out. So shortly after they released this statement, the Shrimpers Association and Hyman's confirmed that they had a formal resolution. They sent out a joint press release where both sides called the issue unintentional, and then the association praised the restaurant's willingness to work collaboratively going forward. So one of the restaurants is basically they're not going to be part of the lawsuit anymore. The association was satisfied with the resolution, and that's that. So I think a lot of people were kind of surprised maybe to see Hyman's on there since it's such a well-known spot. I know the joke around here is that that's where tourists go, and I still don't know many locals who have ever even been in there. That's a topic for another day, but it's obviously a very popular place with tourists. So it was kind of surprising, I think, to see them on there. But to be fair, if they weren't advertising that it was local shrimp, then hey, they didn't lie. But granted, they unintentionally did with this third party, that they had doing their social media. I'm not sure how something like that happens. Like, the team doesn't check with the restaurant, or the restaurant's not checking on the social media team's work. But all right, whatever. They've fixed it. They've moved on, and now we're down to 24 restaurants that are still in that lawsuit. Perhaps some others will make similar gestures. We'll delete things off our website or remove them from the menu or wherever they're claiming that they're serving local shrimp when they're not. We may see more resolutions like this, but we'll see what ends up happening. If the Shrimpers Association is only letting Hyman's go because they believe it was unintentional, perhaps even if restaurants make changes, they won't drop them from the lawsuit because yeah, it's great you made these changes, but you intentionally misled people. So that may be the difference. We'll see. It'll be interesting if other restaurants, what they end up saying about this. And I'll be sure to continue updating you all as this shrimp fraud story continues. Of course, one of the big national stories right now is this, horrible situation in Texas. They had this catastrophic flooding. There's over 100 people dead last I checked. I mean, just awful, awful, horrible news for the great state of Texas. And I can't imagine what some of those, families and friends and neighbors are all going through right now, in addition to the loss of life, of course, which is the most important part. There's also loss of property, damage to property. I was watching one news story where like a post office in one of the towns was completely washed away. Just devastating. And if you want to help, there's always a lot of places that spring to mind, like Red Cross or something. But there's actually a fun local way that you can help out thanks to the Terrace Theater, which is that independent movie theater on James Island, located in that plaza on Maybank Highway, right across from the poorhouse. They're going to host a screening. Of the classic 1993 Richard Linklater film, Dazed and Confused. Love that movie. I haven't seen it in a while, so maybe I'll go check this out. Why that movie? Well, it's based in Texas, so I guess that's really the only tie to the story. And they're going to screen it, just one screening. It's going to be 7:30 p.m. on July 22nd. 100% of proceeds will go directly to the Texas Children's Central Texas Flood Hope Fund. Sorry, that was a mouthful. And so again, July 22nd, 7:30 p.m. You can get tickets to see Dazed and Confused. If you've never seen it, again, it's a classic, just a great movie, starring a young Ben Affleck, by the way, as well as Parker Posey and many, many others. And all those funds will go, to that organization I just mentioned. So a great way to give back while having fun. Of course, there's all sorts of other stories going on involving the Trump administration. The apparent no Epstein client list story just broke. And we're going to talk about the Trump administration, but specifically what's happening here in South Carolina because the Trump admin is withholding millions in funding that South Carolina schools were supposed to receive back on July 1st. So it's part of a freeze on more than $6 billion in a congressionally approved grants. I'm sorry, that $6 billion is congressionally approved grants. However, they've been put on hold as the Department of Education is reviewing them. The impacted grants constitute around 13% of the federal funding South Carolina schools received last year, totaling more than $84 million. This is according to the Learning Policy Institute through this story by ABC News 4. According to one teacher, whose name is Kat Lowe, she is a high school teacher and also president of the Berkeley County Education Association. I think she summed it up pretty succinctly, saying, quote, "We are going to be asked to do more with less," end quote. Yeah, obviously, when funding is held, they're, the stuff that they're expecting to use that money on, they cannot, at least for the moment. It could just end up being delayed or it could be cut completely. So, as usual, our poor teachers, um, just as she said, going to have to do more with less, which seems like is we ask teachers to do that all the time. So, what is this pause about? Well, first of all, the pause gives federal officials up to 90 days to review how six different grant programs align with the White House's priorities. So that's what this is all about. The Trump admin has accused some states of using education grants to fund a quote radical left wing agenda, end quote. I'm sure a lot of you saw where this was going when I said these funds were paused. So, the Trump admin is looking at certain grant programs to determine if it's a radical left wing agenda that's hidden in there trying to get your kids. And if they determine so, there may be cuts in funding, either partial or completely. We'll see what ends up happening. So, what are these sinister programs that are sneaking their way into schools? Well, the six they're looking at, and you can look these up, by the way, by the titles I'm about to give you to learn more about them. But one is a grant about migrant education. Another is supporting effective instruction, English language acquisition, student support in academic enrichment programs, and the Nita M. Lowy, 21st Century Community Learning Center. So, the migrant education one, that first one, you can, pretty much connect the dots on that one and why the Trump admin doesn't like that. The other ones you might not be, super keen on. You might not know about them. I certainly wasn't. I'm not going to go through each of them, but when you look them up, they certainly don't seem like something that even they could construe as sort of some left wing thing, For instance, that last one I mentioned, the Community Learning Center. This is a grant program that supports the creation of community learning centers that provide academic enrichment opportunities during non-school hours for children, particularly students who attend high poverty and low performing schools. Shock, gasp, left wing, radical. Oh, wait, what? That's all? That's what it is? Yes. The programs, although different, these grants fund programs that are just stuff like that, trying to help students. There is no radical left wing agenda by, allowing kids to learn more after school hours in high poverty and low performing schools. They're helping them try to help them to do better academically, and also perhaps giving them a place to be. Who knows, maybe these areas are where parents maybe can't pick up their kid or be home for their kid or kids when school is over due to work hours or whatever. And a program like that after school could be beneficial in that sense as well. It's just insane to me. Again, when I read this, I'm like, oh, okay, I can probably guess the types of things they're looking for. And again, there's a couple on that list. You're like, yeah, of course, that's what they're looking at. Not saying it's right, but you can at least sort of get where they're coming from. Like, yeah, of course they don't like, English language acquisition. They don't want, we know how the Trump admin is. We don't need to dive into it. But it's wild to me that there's programs that you can't even twist to fit their logic. Like, how are they claiming this is some radical left wing agenda? Again, I encourage you to look up all those programs. If you missed it, there's a link in the show notes. You can see that. When I looked them up, nothing of those ones that, again, the titles don't really tell you what they are. It's wild to me that these are programs that are being paused. My hope is that when this 90-day pause, hopefully sooner, they'll go ahead and green light all these funds, and our schools can get the funding that they were planning on. We'll see what ends up happening. I'll certainly let you know. In addition to what I also said, some of these grants also target efforts to reduce class size, which is a growing concern in the Tri-County area, according to this ABC News reporting, because there's a lot of growth. We have a lot of people moving to the area, and bigger classrooms can make it harder for children to learn and harder for teachers to control the class, and also, give the necessary instruction that each student requires when classes are so big. So again, how are they twisting these into some, radical woke nonsense? It makes no sense to me. And again, not saying anything that they deem woke that I can go, okay, yeah, I see where they're coming from in terms of, yeah, they would consider that, something bad when it isn't. So I'm not saying that, there were programs that should be cut, but it's just crazy to me that these aren't even ones that seem to even be mildly related to the things they're usually railing against. These seem like common sense, great programs for our children in the state, and I don't understand it at all. Much like the big beautiful bill, where there's a lot of cuts, and you're like, who thinks this is a good idea? Like, who sits down and be like, yeah, let's cut these benefits for people, and especially when the cuts aren't, you would think, oh, they're closing loopholes, they're making sure people who don't really deserve things aren't getting them. No, they're just cutting, period. And so this is another indication of that, where I'm like, I just don't make it make sense. Like, it just doesn't compute to me that these are things that should even be looked at for cuts. But here we are. And lastly, this is a story that's a couple weeks old at this point. I just haven't had a moment to put it into the show. But basically, the Charleston-based Gray Star Real Estate Partners. They're a business that is behind a lot of, apartments and things here in the Charleston area, and beyond, for that matter. But the company is located here. They were sued by the Department of Justice, and after 6 months after that lawsuit was, and by the way, that lawsuit was about conspiring to keep rents high. I think we talked about this on the podcast. So 6 months after it was sued for that, they are being investigated again, this time for imposing illegal fees on military personnel. So in addition to conspiring with other organizations to keep our rents high, they're also imposing fees on military personnel that they shouldn't. The federal agency said that on June 24th, on June 24th, this is when, the Justice Department put out this information to the public, saying that the apartment giant has agreed to pay $1.4 million to resolve allegations that it violated the Service Members Civil Relief Act when it charged tenants for terminating their leases after receiving mandatory relocation orders. Yes, you heard that right. When our military members, who, we're supposed to support, and, they're some of the bravest amongst us, and, they're putting themselves above, or below the country. They are doing what's best for their country. Now, we could talk about, the individual circumstances. And, I know that you might not agree with some of the things that our military is tasked with doing, especially right now, but nonetheless, they signed up for this. We should be supporting them. And when they are told that they have to go somewhere else to continue their service with whatever branch they're in, it's unfathomable to me that these apartment company basically was charging them for canceling their leases early. And besides the fact that is something they should probably just do, it's also illegal to charge those fees. So it's not even just like, hey, you should do the right thing. Like, this is what they're supposed to do. So in any event, the Justice Department said that this property management company, which, by the way, is the nation's largest, as it oversees more than 800,000 U.S. housing units, The Justice Department said they relied on software that it knew would automatically impose early termination charges on renters who are covered by the act. So not only were they charging it, they knew that the software that they had would just automatically do it when they put in, cancel lease, and then they didn't fix it. They didn't, reimburse them or anything like that. So in a written statement, Greystar said that it actively and cooperatively engaged with the DOJ to bring this matter to a resolution. The Meeting Street firm will set aside $1.35 million to pay affected military members and their co-tenants. It will also pay a $77,370 civil penalty. The company will further pay triple damages to the service members who paid the early termination charges. In going forward, Greystar is required to make changes to its policies and training, including adopting software and forms at all its properties to comply with that Service Members Civil Relief Act. So, glad they're being held accountable. Glad our service members who were legally charged these fees are going to get that money back and that this is changing. But again, putting aside the fact that it was illegal that they were doing this, even if it wasn't a law, it just seems like the right thing to do. Like a service member doesn't have a choice sometimes if they get relocated. They don't necessarily say, hey, send me to wherever. Like they don't have that choice. And you were charging them to end their lease early? Again, even if it wasn't a law, that's just bad. But it was a law, so it's even worse. I'm glad that they were caught, basically, and are being held accountable. But yeah, I've been holding on to that story. Like I said, no other reason than I just couldn't really find an episode to get, to talk about it. But it's just the fact that this, in addition to this whole thing, like I mentioned at the top, they are also under investigation for conspiring to keep rents high. As if we needed any proof that these big companies that are behind housing are not our friends. They are not here to help us. I don't think we needed that proof, but there is some that shows that at least one business that is based in Charleston, they were doing some not so great things, some very shady things, and I'm glad that they've been caught. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins, who produces this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio through LMC Soundsystem. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. I'll be back with you later this week. I hope you have a great rest of your week. But until then, good night and good luck.